Boo! Well, I was at the doctor's earlier. I had my ultrasound of my left, you know what, my testicle. And good news, it's not cancer, but it's a TMI maybe. It's a cyst and a vesicle. At least that's what he told me in his undoctored opinion. So, but he was pretty sure of it. The good news is it's not cancer. So I'm glad about that. Because I thought it would have been a cruel, well, not cruel. It would have pissed me off. It would have made me mad if it turned out that I had cancer just as I was retiring. Like, it's like wait all this time to finally pack it in for work and then find out that you got a disease that might be a bad one. I'd like to at least get, I'd like to at least get a couple of good years, under my belt before something like that happens. No guarantees. I try to make myself ready for whatever happens, but that's an optimistic wish, right? So I came down to the beach on the way home, and I texted my wife and I said, I'm just going to drop by. I took the afternoon off from work. I said, I'm just going to drop by and do my swim a little bit earlier than usual. And just read. What I didn't want to do was come home. My dog, Rudy, he gets separation anxiety when I'm gone. I didn't want to come home, have him see me, and then leave him a little later to come to the beach in the afternoon. So I thought, pack it all in one. That's what I've done. So I'm just going to sit here and read, and I'll just let the camera run. Those of you that might pop in, you can enjoy the view with me if you want. And spend a little time. Carry on with Boswell's presumptuous task. Well, I'll go ahead and read it aloud. Maybe you can share it with me. This is the story of the making of the life of Samuel Johnson. Boswell insisted that the luster be lit. Apparently the first time this had been done for 30 years. He was extravagantly happy. For once, he was at ease with himself. I was quite the laird. Oh, hi. Hi, Adriana Nizzle. I was quite the Laird of Auchenbrook in the inner temple, free from any imaginary distance. Hey, can you let me know, is the wind a problem? Is the wind noisy? I'm good, thank you. Hope you're well as well. I just got back from the hospital. I was getting my ultrasound, so that's good news. The technician told me that it's probably not cancer, so that's good. Something else. I'll probably need surgery, but at least it's not likely to kill me. That's good. Hey, is there a windy noise, I wonder? Here, come in water, please. I was just in the water. Oh, you want to go near the water? All right. Sure. Oh, there's a woman over there in the water. How's this? What's a halas? Take halas. I don't know what that means. Glass? Glassa? I don't know what that means. Head underwater, please. No. I was just in the water. So, oh, look at that. The birds are going after my book. Hey, 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 hey. It's a book. The seagull was going after my... Look at that. The seagull tore my book. I'm going to read my book. I hope the wind noise isn't too bad. Hey, Kurt. Hi, Klaus. Hey, Klaus, can you let me know, is the wind noisy? I was just in the water. No, I don't want to go underwater. I was just out there swimming. I got all cold. Oh, the ocean is louder than the wind, huh? Oh, wow. Are you ready? Well, I don't know. I guess so. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read my book. You guys can hang out if you want. Listen to the sound of the sea. He had done only a little reading of Blackstone's commentaries to prepare himself for the English bar. He planned to master English law by attending the law courts and taking notes on the cases. It could not be too difficult, he reasoned. After all, the Scotsman had done the same. Lord Mansfield had become Lord Chief Justice, and Alexander Wedderburn, now ennobled as Lord Loughborough, Solicitor General. Another Scot, Boswell's distant cousin, Thomas Erskine, was foregoing a brilliant career at the bar that would lead him, like Wedderburn, to become Lord Chancellor in due course. In fact, all these comparisons were false ones, because each man proposed as a model by Boswell had better cause to expect success in England. Erskine, for example, had been educated in England and had always practiced there. He was 17 years younger than Boswell when called to the bar. After being called, he had continued to study with a special pleader, the only way to master the complexities of English law. And he was a brilliant advocate, the greatest, according to one legal historian, ever to practice at the English bar. The day after the inaugural dinner, Boswell began to attend the sittings of Lord Mansfield's court at Westminster Hall. Soon his enthusiasm dulled. English law was far too technical to absorb in this way. Moreover, it was incomprehensible without a grounding in the general principles, and Boswell had none. His attendances became less frequent, and after 8 days he stopped going altogether. Boswell was delighted to be in London once again. He immediately resumed his affair with the celebrated femme fatale, Margaret Caroline Rood, whom he had known since 1776, soon after her appearance in the Old Bailey. Charged with forgery, had made her for a while the most notorious woman in England. Johnson himself had talked of visiting her then, but had been deterred by the fear that it might get into the papers. But Boswell had gone to see her, supposedly incognito, curious to meet a woman credited with the irresistible power of fascination. Mrs. Rood had not disappointed. During their interview, he had been so moved as to seize her silken hand and later to press it to his lips. She had spoken of all the trouble she had been through. Boswell pointedly advised her that love would be the best remedy, but she must now be very cautious in her choice. He said that he should be much obliged if she would give him leave to call on her sometimes. She answered that she was always at home. Hypnotized, Boswell wished wished her good night with another kiss. He returned to Powell, feeling a little confused. That same night, before going to bed, he sat down to describe their encounter in a letter to his wife, which he prudently decided afterwards not to send. You think? Mrs. Rood could well have been a model for Becky Sharp. She possessed many qualities in common with Thackeray's heroine, including a relation and protector called Rawdon. Born in Ireland, she married at 17 a Lieutenant Valentine Rood, whom she soon abandoned, under a series of pseudonyms, among them Miss de la Rocroix, Miss Mafassons, Mrs. Potter, Mrs. Gore, and Miss, later Countess, de Grossberg. She pursued a career as a teacher or governess, using her promotion to ensnare a succession of rich men from whom she extorted money. She acquired a number of valuable skills, among them the ability to forge handwriting accurately. In 1770, she began to live with one Daniel Peru in the guise of his wife, and rapidly bore him three children. Peru was a speculator on the exchange who lived above his means, already a bankrupt 3 times over. He was therefore complacent when Mrs. Rood became the mistress of James Adair, a relation of the wealthy army agent William Adair. She began to forge bonds of promissory notes to Adair in Adair's name, and against these, man, you could get hung for that. That's not good. And against these, Daniel Peru and his twin brother Robert borrowed money to fund Daniel's speculation. As more and more cash was required, so too were the promissory notes. The Perus hoped for a windfall, which would enable them to clear their debts and regain the forged notes. But of course it never came. Instead, they sank deeper and deeper in debt. When one of the forgeries was uncovered, the Perus brothers claimed to have supposed Mrs. Rood's promissory notes genuine. She turned king's evidence. As a result of her testimony, both brothers were convicted and sentenced to death. See, I told you, get hung for that. It was decided that she too should stand trial, and she conducted her own defense, presenting herself as a helpless, modest victim. Her ordeal lasted only half an hour. The jury and the watching public were bewitched. Her acquittal was greeted in court with loud cheering. 6 weeks later, the Perus were hanged at Tyburn. That would be Tyburn Tree. Notorious place to hang forgers. While he was in London, While he was in London working on the tour, Boswell had renewed his connection with Mrs. Rood, and they had begun an affair. An accomplished courtesan, Mrs. Rood was familiar with the arts of love. With her, Boswell experienced the sweetest sexual pleasure he had ever known. Her notoriety excited him almost as much as her beauty. He could not resist telling people of his involvement with his enchantress. Rumors of that affair with her spread as far as Scotland. On a visit to London later in 1786, Sir William and Lady Forbes confronted him with the story, which he was forced to deny. Sir Joshua Reynolds warned Boswell that it would ruin him if he were generally known to have such a connection. For her part, Mrs. Rood wanted Boswell to procure for her an introduction to the Lord Chancellor, whom she hoped to enlist in support of her claim against a former lover. On the 26th of February, 1786, after spending part of the day with her and drinking rather too liberally, Boswell called on Lord Thurlow at 9:30 in the evening. He was shown up to the drawing room. Thurlow's other guests had gone home, and his servant informed the unexpected visitor that his lordship had retired. But after a little while, Thurlow appeared and greeted him courteously. Boswell wanted to explain why he had disregarded the Lord Chancellor's advice on moving to London. But Thurlow did not seem at all disturbed on this count. He was more inclined to discuss Dr. Johnson. He had read Boswell's book, and he could not understand why he had found it so absorbing. Why should one wish to go on and read how Dr. Johnson went from one place to another? He was mystified. Boswell boldly asked him why the king had not been prepared to increase Johnson's pension. I was wondering the same thing. Thurlow could give no definite answer, but thought that perhaps Johnson's application had been overlooked. Really? Really? So that's the beauty of reading something like this. I had no idea that that was the case. I had wondered also why the king had overlooked him. Because it ended up resulting in Johnson's death. Well, Johnson may have gone on for another year or two if the king had increased his pension. Though he had not mentioned Mrs. Root's claim, Boswell felt sure that she would be pleased to hear what? Though he had not mentioned Mrs. Root's claim, Boswell felt sure that she would be pleased to hear of the good reception he had received, and he hurried straight from the Lord Chancellor's house to her lodgings. The servant told him that she was not at home, and when he expressed surprise, she appeared very angry in her night clothes and sent him on his way. Boswell was now steadily gathering materials for his Life of Johnson. His Journal of a Tour to the Hebrides had not required any research. Of course, all he had to do then was to polish the manuscript journal already in his possession. But the Life would require him to tap a very wide variety of sources. He had begun this process some years before Johnson's death, as well as quizzing Johnson himself about his own past. Boswell also collected information from others, particularly old friends who had known Johnson before Boswell did. Often he would take down what they told him in their presence. He kept a special notebook for this purpose. Boswell was especially keen to obtain letters from Johnson, not just for the information they contained, likely to be more accurate than the memories of his recipients, but also because he had decided to reproduce many of them in the text, and he did. One of the reasons the book was so long. Immediately after Johnson's death, Boswell wrote off to several of Johnson's oldest acquaintances, asking them for packets of Johnsonian material. He collected more while in London working on the tour. On the 6th of May, 1785, for example, Boswell had dined with Dr. John Tyler, a lifelong friend of Johnson's who had been at school with him in Lichfield. Boswell had twice accompanied Johnson on visits to Tyler's home in Derbyshire. Now Tyler was living in London, a rector of St. Margaret's Church, Westminster. Boswell took notes on their conversation. During a dinner party at Langton's the following day, Boswell found himself in a corner with Sir John Hawkins. In a circumspect manner, the rival biographers discussed Johnson's fear of death. Had he been afraid that his sins might damn him? Hawkins hinted that he had found evidence. That's what I think it was. Because Johnson he was a rather loose man in his youth. He had found evidence. Hawkins hinted that he had found evidence of strong amorous passions in Johnson's diaries, yeah. But he did not indulge them. But he did not indulge them? Inquired Boswell. I have said enough, replied Hawkins, having whetted Boswell's curiosity, no doubt deliberately without giving anything away. Hawkins hinted that he had found evidence of strong... Well, I would think... Oh, I know why. Because later, when Boswell finally wrote the Life of Johnson, he incorporated this information into the biography. So Boswell wasn't aware of this. All the 20 years he spent with Johnson, he wasn't aware that Johnson was kind of a reckless young man. Because of course Boswell had met Johnson when Johnson was older and more pious. Oh, okay, so it was Hawkins that clued Boswell in. But if Hawkins thought that he had set his rival on the wrong track, he was mistaken. What? There's a comment. Brucey, can you go underwater, please, and maybe not come back up? But if Hawkins thought that he had set his rival on the wrong track, he was mistaken. Boswell knew much more about Johnson's amorous inclinations than he revealed. Of course he would. Okay, so now I know. He did. 2 years earlier, Boswell had dined with Johnson at Bolt Court, which is where Johnson lived. And while his host was napping, had interrogated Elizabeth Desmonds, who lived with Johnson, the widowed daughter of Johnson's godfather and one of several women in Johnson's household. As a young woman, Mrs. Desmoulins had lived in Hampstead with Johnson's wife, Elizabeth Porter. Teddy was more than 20 years older than her husband and, it seemed, had repelled his advances. Elizabeth Desmoulins revealed how she would join the spurned husband in his bedroom, laying her head on his pillow and allowing him to kiss and fondle her until he was obviously excited. Then he would cry, "Get you gone." Well, there's a nice bit of information. Wow. Boswell thought this story too delicate to include in his Life of Johnson, and he didn't. I read the whole Life of Johnson, and it was not in there. He kept his notes on his conversation with Ms. Desmondes in a separate file of papers marked Extraordinary Johnsonia, Tacenda, to be kept silent. In fact, Boswell soon related what she had told him to Burke, but to have polished such details in an 18th century biography would have been difficult. Those who admired Johnson for his moral qualities would have been shocked to read of his toying with a young woman while his wife lay in a nearby room, while those who did not share Johnson's moral standards might have despised him for not making the most of his opportunity. Wow! Gotta soak that up a little bit. So that's just the stuff that we know, right? So what was going on that isn't written down? And there's probably more to that story than what's recorded right there. Huh. Anyone who published such a story was likely to have been thought odious. Yeah. And Boswell was particularly sensitive to any criticism that he had abused Johnson's confidence. It seems, too, that Boswell felt sympathy for his friend and was reluctant to expose him even to posterity in this way. What a curious account, Boswell noted in his diary after the interview with Mrs. Desmoulins, that he should bring himself to the very verge of what he thought was a crime. Flesh is weak, right? A few weeks after his guarded conversation with Hawkins, Boswell breakfasted with William Stratham, an old and constant friend of Johnson's who had known him since the mid-1750s. Stratham gave Boswell some anecdotes and promised to hunt for his letters from Johnson, at least some of which he gave to Boswell before he died, only a month later. Boswell was briefly able to see the bookseller Tom Davies before he died too on May 5th. Davies had been mentioned in the press as a potential biographer of Johnson's. Boswell also had several productive sessions with Tom Tyers, who had been first to publish a biographical sketch of Johnson after his death. He endured a dull evening with Brocklesby, rendered worthwhile when the doctor produced 16 letters from Johnson, and most important of all, he secured a copy of Johnson's celebrated letter to Lord Chesterfield. What? Is that where he got it? That was a very important letter that Johnson had written to Lord Chesterfield that was kept secret for a long time, but then was considered very well written. I've since read it, but I didn't know where Boswell got it. Boswell was determined that the original should be produced in his book, and it was. In 1747, Johnson had published his plan of a dictionary of the English language, a prospectus designed to attract advanced subscriptions. His publisher, Dodsley, had persuaded him that his This prospectus should be dedicated to the Earl of Chesterfield. Oh, he's going to explain it. Okay. A distinguished statesman and diplomat and a nobleman, then much admired for his wit, his elegant manners, and his refined tastes. Qualities which, 30 years later, would be characterized as sneering, affection, and snobbery. It was hoped that Chesterfield might accept the role of Johnson's patron in this important project. Chesterfield did indeed encourage Johnson initially and presented him with £10, but subsequently neglected him. In particular, Johnson felt affronted when he called on, and I remember, and Chesterfield kept him waiting outside. When he called on Chesterfield at his splendid London home, only to be kept waiting intolerably long. There was no further contact between them until 7 years later, when the dictionary was nearing publication. Then Chesterfield's interest revived, and he published 2 flattering essays recommending the work. Johnson was indignant. After the best part of a decade of toil and hardship, he was certainly not prepared to accept Chesterfield's patronage at this late stage. Far from dedicating his dictionary to Chesterfield, as the Earl had hoped, Johnson wrote him a contemptuous letter repudiating any obligation to acknowledge his help. Here's part of the letter. 7 years, my lord, have now passed since I waited in your outward rooms or was repulsed from your door, during which time I have been pushing on my work through difficulties, of which it is useless to complain, and have brought it at last to the verge of publication without one act of assistance, one word of encouragement, or one smile of favor, which did get the £10. Such treatment I did not expect, for I never had a patron before. Is not a patron, my lord, one who looks with unconcern on a man struggling for life in the water, and, when he has reached ground, encumbers him with help. The notice which you have been pleased to take of my labors, had it been early, had it been kind, but it has been delayed until I am indifferent and cannot enjoy it, till I am sorry and cannot impart it, till I am known and do not want it. So very well written. I really, really like that. I read that, this is like the 3rd or the 4th time I've read that letter. That's just a snippet from it. This letter quickly became part of the Johnson legend, that a shabby, hard-up, footnote here, a year after the publication of his dictionary, Johnson was arrested for debt. This letter quickly became part of the Johnson legend, that a shabby, hard-up scholar of humble birth should write dismissively to an aristocratic patron was remarkable, and the posthumous publication of Chesterfield's letters against the wishes of the Earl's executors raised the quarrel to the level of a Kulturskampf. I don't know what that is. These letters, addressed to his natural son, Philip Stratford, outlined a program of behavior for a young man of fashion, stressing the importance of etiquette, the avoidance of low company, and the need for decent and dissimulation and for the need of deceit and dissimulation in relations between the sexes. Why? The cynical amorality permeating the letters outraged the public increasingly intolerant of aristocratic vice. Chesterfield's emphasis on artifice ran counter to the tide of sentiment. Johnson himself declared that the letters teach the morals of a whore and the manners of a dancing master. Oh, boy. I think I'm going to sign off. All right. Thanks for joining me. Those who joined me, take care. Have a good day. Be safe, but not too safe.